Last week, the Senate Republicans announced their plan for $900 million in tax relief. Joining me to provide a DFL perspective on the plan is the former chair of the Tax Reform Division Committee and ranking minority member of the current Tax Committee, Senator Ann Rest. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Republicans say that having a surplus means that they're taking too many taxes and it should be returned to the taxpayers. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure that I agree that there's too much money being raised. I think what we are seeing in the surplus is that Minnesota's economy is booming. And I think that the challenge is threefold. One, how much of that surplus we should continue to save and put away. The governor has certainly proposed not spending all of it. We had a constitutional requirement, not a constitutional requirement, a statutory requirement to put aside 1/3 of it from the November forecast, and then we spent it on the insurance bill. I think we should put that back to start with to keep us in good stead with the bond houses and our AAA rating. I certainly think that since we haven't had a tax bill in, I think, since 2013, that we should work really hard to have a bipartisan agreement on a tax bill this year and to provide some tax relief. Is $900 million the right number? I think that certainly is certainly less than what the House is proposing, but it's a whole lot more than what the governor is proposing. And I think that we need to be responsive to things like investments in education. And I think some of the people that otherwise might be getting some sort of tax break from the Republican plan, if you ask them, do you want $100 more, or would you like to see the money invested in education, in keeping the elderly in their homes, or good care in nursing homes, or in transportation and transit? I think you'd probably get a wide variety of responses to that question as to where people's priorities are.
The Republicans argue that the state must cut taxes on Social Security to keep those older Minnesotans in the state. What is your perspective on this issue? Well,
first of all, I think we probably will be doing something in Social Security taxation relief. We are one of just a handful of states that taxes to some extent, and we are a conforming state, so we follow the federal guidelines. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that many recipients of Social Security don't pay any taxes on their Social Security income at all. I don't know what the figure is, but I think it's something like 20%. If Social Security is what you live on, it's very unlikely that you would have an income from other sources that would be so high that your Social Security income would be taxed. So the challenge is, if we're trying to give tax relief to Social Security recipients that are in the kind of the middle range, I think that that's something that we're going to see some bipartisan support on. But the DFL is not interested in giving a Social Security tax break to people whose tax returns show that they have $500,000 in income. And right now, the proposal that we have seen from them has just been, let's get rid of all the taxing of Social Security income. And I don't think that's very efficient.
You'd like there to be a cutoff.
And we have the DFL has a proposal that I've authored that would simply give a subtraction from Minnesota taxable income for a stated amount of any taxable income that comes from Social Security, and we would index that for inflation over the years. But rather than giving a tax break to people that otherwise have incomes of $500,000, I don't think that kind of tax break is what keeps those folks in Minnesota or causes them to leave.
In your response to the Republican budget plan or tax plan, you were critical that their plan doesn't mention local government aid. Why do you think local government aid is important?
Well, first of all, on a more general level, I think their plan was severely lacking in specifics. And it may well be that when we actually see their bill, that we're going to see some accommodation and increase in local government aid, at least at the level that the governor has proposed, which is $20 million, and which is the similar amount that was in the veto tax bill of last year.
That had bipartisan support.
Yeah, that had strong bipartisan support. So I would be actually surprised when we start getting details that there wasn't some increase in local government aids. There's none in the House tax bill, but I think we're going to see. I hope we're going to see a better attitude from the Republicans toward local government aid. And why is it important? Well, first of all, we've been cutting when we had the recession. Starting 15 years ago or so, we started cutting local government aid, and we have not yet gotten back to the level that we were before the recession in the mid 2000s. And the local governments, particularly those in Greater Minnesota, they really depend upon it because of their tax base to provide adequate infrastructure. And I think it is a wise investment on the part of the legislature to make sure that we don't have local governments across the state that have struggling tax bases to present such a challenge to them in their budgets that they have to ask their constituents to go without really needed improvements and programs for their citizens.
One last question. The Republican plan is promoting economic growth, as they say, and the proposals would exempt the first $100,000 of business tax and the automatic inflator, provide tax incentives for new businesses to purchase equipment. They say these are reforms that small businesses are asking for. Do you support these kinds of reforms?
Well, I do think we need to revisit the statewide business property tax. That went into effect in the Ventura reforms in 2001. And I think it's a failed program now in terms of how it was originally supposed to be a substitute for asking businesses and cabin owners to participate in the school district's referenda. And that was going to be the substitute. But and the dollars were originally supposed to go to the schools. And then within the first year, Governor Pawlenty ordered that repealed, and so it's just gone into the general fund. Mm-hmm. And I think that the feature of it that I believe would make the most difference is getting rid of the inflator, and I have supported that in the past. When we exempt the first $100,000 or $200,000 of market value from the statewide business property tax, it certainly is a gesture to the Greater Minnesota Main Street businesses, but it's not going to have all that much of an effect on businesses in the metropolitan area that have many millions of dollars of value. That $100,000 is hardly a hiccup.
Senator Russ, I'm sorry, we have to stop.
You have to go.
We have to
I can
stop.
talk about tax policy
you can.
forever.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Of course, it's my pleasure.